Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream, and thank you so much for tuning in for another show. The U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff visited Gaza yesterday, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation base, and he did not make a lot of statements at the time. Following that, we started to hear more statements coming from Steve Witkoff denying that there is starvation inside of the Gaza Strip, and also making certain statements about Hamas, in particular in relation to disarming the movement and the fact that they are open to an all-out solution as well. We're going to talk all about this and the latest updates and talks in relation to a ceasefire that is looking to be an all-out deal if it happens, despite the fact that they are speaking about less likelihood of anything happening now, at least in relation to Israel, and following the position of Hamas in relation to the starvation campaign. They said we're not going to go back to any negotiations unless the people are fed, unless this starvation campaign ends. We're going to talk about this and the recent feedback that is coming from Israeli families of the prisoners of war who are blaming Israel of committing a Holocaust against the Israeli prisoners of war inside of the Gaza Strip, despite all of the Israeli media brainwashing and propaganda campaigns to try and blame the Palestinian resistance of deliberately trying to starve the prisoners of war, simultaneously completely denying the fact that there's a starvation campaign against over 2 million Palestinians inside of the Gaza Strip. If we have time, I'll go into also some questions towards the end of this live stream. Let's begin with the first report that I wanted to talk to you about here. Hamas denies disarmament claims. Why did they deny, and what happened exactly? Well, Benjamin Netanyahu started to say in recent months that he demands that the Palestinian resistance has to disarm for there to be any solution. Benjamin Netanyahu never asked this before. However, this was part of his plan to make the negotiations more difficult. Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel know very well that the Palestinian resistance will never be disarming up until the full rights of the Palestinian people are granted alongside their historical rights, including liberation, the return of the refugees, and having an independent and sovereign state. Steve Witkoff said in a recent statement that Hamas showed willingness to disarm, and he also denied the fact that there's a starvation campaign happening inside of the Gaza Strip. Hamas quickly responded to the claims. In one of their statements, they said that, well, a couple of things. Firstly, that they did not agree to disarm, and they're saying as well in an official statement that the weapons of the resistance are a legitimate national and legal right as long as the occupation continues, adding that this right is upheld by international conventions and norms. The movement emphasized that disarmament will not be considered unless the full rights of the Palestinian people are restored, chief among them the establishment of an independent sovereign Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. So they're denying that Steve Witkoff, what Steve Witkoff actually stated in relation to disarming the Palestinian resistance, although they are not denying that there is a prospect of disarming as an organization so long as the Palestinian rights are granted. I mean, that is quite obvious. At the end of the day, the Palestinian resistance said previously multiple times that they would prefer to get their rights without fighting, but that they know who they're dealing with, and that enemy that they're dealing with never showed willingness to adhere to international law, grant the Palestinian people their rights, or strive for an actual peaceful solution, as we can see from the previous and current experience that they're having with the side that chose this path with them in the form of the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank, which we will be talking about too later on in this video. Hamas also said that what Steve Witkoff stated about the fact that there is no starvation campaign was a premeditated farce intended to mislead public opinion and polish the image of the occupation. They said that the goal of Witkoff's visit was to provide the occupation with political cover to manage the starvation and continue the killing of children and civilians in Gaza. Witkoff had misleading statements trying to attempt to portray the aid distribution as peaceful, and also denying the fact that 1,300 people died due to starvation. Now, this figure is coming from Hamas. Now, yesterday I quoted a different figure, so they're quoting a much bigger number than I spoke about yesterday. 1,300 due to the starvation campaign. They said that the United States administration is a full partner in crime and in the genocide that is taking place in the full view of the entire world. So we have an outright denial here coming from Hamas about Steve Witkoff's statements, unless Steve Witkoff chose to speak about certain things that he had with Hamas without providing any context. So Hamas could have told him, look, we're willing to disarm so long as we have a country, a state called Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital. Jerusalem, mind you, not East Jerusalem, which is the typical reference when you're talking about a two-state solution, again hinting that the Palestinians are looking for an all-out deal, an all-out solution across all of Palestine. Hamas stated many times before that they want a democratic country, they want to liberate their lands, and they want to have the rights, the contemporary and historical rights of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian refugees. So clearly, Steve Witkoff is coming to Gaza not really to try and find a solution, at least not from, well, the statements that we heard from him or the claims that came out of him denying the fact that there is a starvation campaign happening inside of the Gaza Strip. In the meantime, the Palestinian resistance in the past couple of days started to release footage of the Israeli prisoners of war, the IDF prisoners of war, who are held in Gaza starving. These images were not published in Israel initially. However, some of the families agreed for these images to be released of the Israeli IDF prisoners of war starving in a really bad state inside of the Gaza Strip. Headlines in Israel started to talk about cynical abuse and cynical moves coming from Hamas as propaganda to show these people. Benjamin Netanyahu called the families, saying that Hamas is starving them to death when we're actually sending aid to the Gaza Strip. But that sentiment wasn't really shared by the families of the prisoners of war, who actually blamed Israel of committing a Holocaust against the Israeli prisoners of war in Gaza, blaming the Israeli government. This was one of the statements that came from Einav Tsen-Gauker, the mother of Matan Tsen-Gauker, who is held inside of Gaza. She said the following: Matan is undergoing a Holocaust under the auspices of a government that sets unrealistic threshold conditions for a deal, outright blaming the Israeli government and also confirming that they are putting in almost impossible conditions to end the war. As every week, families of the kidnapped people issued a statement at the Begin Gate near the Kiryat Tel Aviv. Einav Tsen-Gauker, the mother of kidnapped Matan Tsen-Gauker, said in a statement that her son is undergoing a Holocaust under the auspices of a government that sets unrealistic threshold conditions for a deal. If, instead of putting a comprehensive agreement on the table, the Israeli government decides to expand the military operation, it is passing a death sentence on the living kidnapped people and exhuming the dead and distancing us from a solution for an indefinite period of time. This is clearly illegal action that flies a black flag over it. That was the first one. But we also had another member of the family member of another prisoner of war blaming Israel of conducting a Holocaust by the state of Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something that is not to be taken lightly, especially in Israel and by Israelis, blaming their own country of committing a Holocaust. The thing that Israel always reminds the people of in Israel, you know, we're here because of the Holocaust and we're protecting you from the Holocaust, and we're here to protect every Jewish person, and Israel is the most safe place for every Jew across the world, and if you're living in another country, you're going to die, and you need to come here, you need to come here, as part of the propaganda campaign to attract people to this neo-colonialist entity and become cannon fodder for a much bigger project that has nothing to do with Judaism. Then this woman said, and the mother of Matan Engrest, she also had a statement. She said in an interview with Ynet that in the last two videos, we see that our children are in the Holocaust, which is being perpetuated by the Israeli government. Evyatar looked different in previous video. They call these signs of life for these videos, but these are signs of death. According to her, Matan should have received medical treatment, but he remained in captivity because he is a soldier. While they are talking about evasion laws, his service is in his hands. I have correspondence with the military intelligence that Matan remained there because he is a soldier. No soldier returned in an Israeli deal. That is accurate because the Palestinian resistance kept the IDF prisoners of war up until the later stages. And they haven't been released because the Israeli side refuses to reach a deal. We're having a very, very harsh criticism coming from the families of the prisoners of war towards the government, outright blaming Israel of a Holocaust. This is something very significant. Moving on to the PLO. See, I told you I want to talk to you about the PLO for a bit because you have an example over there of a side that says, you know, we're a Palestinian side, who has been only talking and saying that we condemn the use of violence, we should have a disarmed state, and condemning the Palestinian resistance, as a matter of fact, participating with Israel in actions against the Palestinian resistance, killing, abusing Palestinian resistance fighters, working hand in hand with Israel against them. Yet despite all of that, look at what the United States is doing. This is the US Department of State. Sanctioning officials of the Palestinian Authority and members of the Palestine Liberation Organization. You've heard that right. They're not stating names, but they're threatening the PLO with sanctions. Imagine that. The Palestinian president condemned Hamas. He whitewashed Israeli crimes. He held the Palestinian resistance responsible for the genocide happening in Gaza. He asked the Palestinian resistance to release Israeli prisoners of war immediately. And they constantly deal with the United States and with Israel. Why is it that the United States, despite all of that, is threatening the Palestinian Authority? Well, according to this, because they're taking diplomatic action and complaining to the ICC and supporting terrorism in textbooks. Imagine that. So, of course, in the grand scheme of things, the United States, the EU, and any countries that label any resistance movement globally as a terrorist organization, they blatantly go against international law that protects nations under occupation, under illegal organizations, under racist regimes, under brutality, protects them and legitimizes their resistance and supports their resistance. The United States knows that very well. EU countries know that very well. And this move coming from the United States clearly shows you that it's not that they're only looking for movements that do not resist them by armed force. They don't want anyone resisting them even in diplomatic means. They don't want anyone to show any sort of opposition. They want the other party to completely surrender. And we heard that from officials in the United States. Trump asked the Palestinian side to surrender. He even had the audacity to ask Iran to surrender. And now the United States is coming up with these moves against the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank and the PLO, despite the fact that the PLO, since a very, very long time, has been a very corrupt organization, and an organization that is in line with the Zionist interests and the American interests too, without any regard for Palestinian interests, and refusing to have any sort of reform, to have any voting, or be a real, genuine representative organization of all of the Palestinian people and all of the Palestinian political movements. The United States is still not happy with that. They're not happy with that because they don't want any side to have any sort of opposition to Israel and the United States, even by diplomatic and political means. And that is a message to everyone saying that it's about, oh, the Palestinian resistance and why are they using this? This is a clear indication that they are looking to impose their will on other nations. And that stems out of arrogance, out of racism, out of a sense of supremacy, out of a neo-colonialist mentality. They don't want anyone to say no. A full authoritarian approach against other nations. And the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, it's as if that didn't happen, hardly anything, because they're petrified by that actual move. Their whole existence depends on Israel and the United States. The existence of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is totally tied with the existence of Israel. They want Israel to continue because they are there because of Israel. They are there to whitewash Israeli crimes. They're there to enable expansion in the West Bank. The squatting establishment expanded from 100,000 to over 900,000 squatters in the West Bank. They're there to whitewash more land grabbing in the West Bank. The Palestinian president himself went against a huge diplomatic effort that could have taken place against Israel in 2008, 2009, after the Israeli aggression against Gaza, with the Goldstone report. It was taken out by request of the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank. And despite all of that, they're facing threats coming from the United States administration. And the United States administration and the Department of State clearly stated that this is in relation to Israel. They were blaming the Palestinian Authority of taking actions to internationalize its conflict with Israel, such as through the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, as if that's some sort of a wrong thing to do. Imagine, they don't want criticism and they don't want anyone resorting to international law. Why? Because they are the biggest outlaws and they're the biggest criminals. And they hate and despise international law and don't abide by it, and only plant it there to use it as and when convenient for them. Since when, or when has the international court and when has the international legal system put in any Western leader in prison or held him accountable? Did it hold George Bush accountable for the millions of Afghanis and Iraqis that he killed? Did it hold Tony Blair accountable for the millions of Iraqis and Afghanis that he killed? Did it hold any other NATO member of the war crimes that NATO committed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other parts of the world too? Has it ever gone against any Western leader? This is a tool in the hands of the United States. And despite that, they don't want these organizations to have any level of independence. And that's why you have all of these statements now, because the ICJ and the ICC, following requests, by the way, and action from independent countries, started to take action against the neo-colonialist entity of Israel occupying Palestine. Threats, death threats, sanction threats, destruction threats against the ICC and the ICJ to that level. Which leads me to the following thing that I wanted to talk to you about. A recent article exposing the Arab regimes still supporting Israel through their countries, simultaneously with the starvation campaign that is taking place in Gaza. One of these reports came in a website called Arabi Post, based on data coming from Israel. Arab food products flowed into Israel during the Gaza famine. Official Israeli data shows what the normalizing countries exported. So we have Arab countries saying that, oh, they're looking to get a ceasefire, they're looking to stop the genocide, they're looking to get aid in by any means necessary, airdropped aid, because they're incapable and they cannot, and it's difficult for them, all of the excuses that we constantly hear, but they are able to allow food to Israel, for Israel. They said that the Arab countries that have normalized relations with Israel have exported dozens of diverse food products from Israel, including hundreds of tons of vegetables, while the occupation has tightened restrictions on the entry of sufficient food to the over 2.1 million people besieged in Gaza that are facing a hunger crisis, spreading famine within the territory. Official Israeli data tracked by Arabi Post revealed that the volume and quantities of food exports flowing from the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and Bahrain to Israel during June 2025. In the same month, the signs of a severe famine were already clearly emerging in Gaza. Severe food shortages and the occupation's continued prevention of sufficient aid entry through July 2025 led to an increase in the number of Gazans dying from hunger. Images and videos inside the Gaza Strip showing children and adults with their bones protruding from extreme hunger, while Israel refused to heed warnings from organizations and countries of the worsening famine in the Gaza Strip. As of the publication of this article, Israeli trade data with normalizing countries for July 2025 had not yet been released. Israel typically publishes its trade statistics monthly, with time lag of approximately 1 month, with January figures, for example, being announced in February. That's why this report came talking about June. It's shameful for these countries to already be dealing with a country committing genocide, let alone implementing a campaign of starvation against the population. And whenever some of these regimes receive criticism, they'll start telling you, why are you diverting the attention? And we're not the ones causing a genocide. You're not causing the genocide, you're enabling the genocide. You're allowing military ships to go to Israel. You are helping Israel with food, and you're preventing the Palestinian people from receiving this aid. This is a clear indication of just how bad the situation is in relation to the Arab regime still supporting Israel, still helping Israel, despite the fact that they are conducting a genocide against the innocent population inside of the Gaza Strip. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you. And I'll open the space up to take a few questions from the community for a limited period of time. Let's have a look. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Stephen, what about the talks between Turkey and Hamas, and what will happen? Well, the talks between Turkey and Hamas are clearly coming as a part of an arrangement that the Palestinian resistance decided to request, at least, to be part of the negotiations. How? They demanded that several other countries participate as guarantors for any peace deal. And that is a very important point. Let me elaborate on that point. You might ask yourself, and people might ask, why doesn't Israel reach a deal with Hamas in Gaza, get all of the prisoners of war out, and then go and attack them again? Because some people in Israel are saying that. Why doesn't the government make a deal, have a deal with Hamas, that's it, then get everyone out, get what we want, and then we can go and attack them at any point? The answer is very simple, but not many people know that. The demands of the Palestinian resistance of certain guarantees will clearly have some sort of tie on Israel's hands. So it's not going to be that easy for Israel to restart a campaign in Gaza. And you might find that bizarre, but that's clearly the case. Why? Well, because why did Netanyahu not do that then? They also tried him. Ceasefire here, ceasefire there, that were supposed to continue. Israel broke both of them. Turkey is one of those countries clearly being a participant in the guarantees. And there could be more participation from countries like China and Russia without real declaration. It doesn't have to happen. But what we do know is that the Palestinian resistance was in China and it was in Russia too. But the country that they're talking to most is Turkey in the meantime. Trump also said that Iran is participating in the talks, although the Iranian side denies. Trump tried to make it out as if Iran is imposing on the Palestinian side what to do, which is ridiculous. However, Iran did not deny that they are constantly being updated with what happens in the negotiations, because clearly all of the things are tied. The statements that we got were from the Turkish side after that meeting, that they said that the Israelis are trying to defeat the heroic resistance of the Palestinian people and also annex the West Bank afterwards, but they did not elaborate too much in relation to the details. But as usual, the majority of the information will not really be made public. As a matter of fact, most of what we're dealing with, even with the information that you're getting and with analysis and with a bit of digging, it's a very small percentage of what's actually happening on the ground. But the only thing we can do is, of course, deal with the information that's given, try and analyze it to the best of our ability so that the viewer can be well informed and not misled, let alone led astray, as mainstream media wants you to be, and the corporate media as well, of course, as the politicians who are on the side of Israel. And that was from Stephen Kelly. Thank you so much for that. Let's go to your next questions, going through the feed. Origin, what's the worst case scenario? If we talk about the worst case scenario for Gaza, we'll take it from the region and then expand. We'll take it from Palestine, then expand. The worst case scenario in Gaza is that Israel continues the starvation campaign and people start dying in their thousands on a daily basis because of the starvation in Gaza. That is a possibility. Then we could be hearing about 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people a day dying, then maybe tens of thousands, up until they almost kill the entirety of the population. So, total ethnic cleansing. That's the first option. And that's only in relation to Gaza. The worst case scenario in the West Bank is a repeat of what Israel has done in Gaza, even if it tries to implement it in a different way, because from a demographic perspective, Israel wants to preserve the Jewish demographic majority, and the West Bank is a bigger problem than Gaza. That's in relation to Palestine. In relation to the region, Benjamin Netanyahu could go mad and expand reckless genocidal attacks on other countries in the region too, and Israel would start using the same levels of aggression and barbaric attacks that it conducted in Gaza against other countries too, which is something that could also lead to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of casualties. And one of the worst cases would be if Israel decides to use a nuclear bomb. And I am absolutely baffled by the fact that hardly anyone talks about the prospect of Israel using nuclear bombs. They'll tell you about Iran and nuclear program, a civil nuclear energy program, but no one talks about the 300 nuclear warheads that a genocidal supremacist entity has secretly without any declaration, and is a country that has proven itself to be capable of using such levels of lethal force. These would be the worst case scenarios, at least in relation to the levels of deaths, as in civilian deaths. Saying that, that same solution could well end Israel, because, you know, if the other sides are going to see this level of destruction in their countries, that would leave them with no option but to have some sort of a response against Israel, and you will have an all-out attack that could once and for all end the Israeli occupation itself. So Israel knows those risks. And again, Israel is in line with the United States with all of the actions that it takes in the region. The United States is in line with Israel. Zobo Custer Mahmoud, do you think that the army censoring in Israel, allowing footage of resistance footage to be released, is the army's way of pressurizing the Netanyahu government? That is absolutely correct. That is 100% correct. As a matter of fact, there's another thing that I wanted to share with you, which was an interesting article published in the on one of the Israeli media outlets. I don't have the article with me now, but it's in relation to the prospect of the IDF chief of staff resigning. It was an article anyway, so I'll share some of the details. And what that article stated is the IDF chief of staff has a final bullet, and that bullet is resignation. Why? Because so far he tried to convince the political leadership, especially Netanyahu, to reach a ceasefire, although he was put in his position as a replacement to the previous IDF chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, because Herzi Halevi clearly gave Benjamin Netanyahu a headache. So they thought that this one would be a yes man. However, they still even face problems with him, with the priorities of the war, the genocide in Gaza, and also in relation to the deal. He's really pressing on having a deal. And again, if you hear his statements, the man clearly, it's as if he's lost. When he was talking about a deal, it's like they tried everything militarily on the ground in Gaza, and they failed. They failed because of the huge resistance success against them in Gaza. And that's why they're covering everything up by punishing the civilian population to cover up this huge failure. So one of the ways of the army, and thank you for mentioning that, because I spoke about this intensely in the past couple of months, is a way to pressure Benjamin Netanyahu. Because for the first time in this genocide, the Israeli public is starting to see what the resistance is doing to the Israeli terrorists in Gaza. The recent images that were published of the prisoners of war, they had to get the authority of the families, by the way. But the actions, as in, when they attack the IDF in Gaza, that goes through the military censorship. And that is 100% a way where the IDF is trying to apply pressure on Netanyahu to reach a deal. And there's so much control or pressure that he can exert on the IDF and what they can and what they cannot publish. But that is absolutely on point. They are definitely doing that to apply pressure on him because they know that they can't do anymore. They can't do anymore. Marvin, why France, maybe the UK waiting till September to recognize a Palestinian state, hoping Palestine gone by September? Anything politically significant with September in Israel, US, UK? Well, for various reasons. The first reason is they need to address the mounting public pressure against their participation and complicity in the barbaric war crimes and genocide and starvation that's happening in Gaza. Keir Starmer talking about recognizing a Palestinian state. Keir Starmer legitimized cutting water and food off of the civilian population back in 2023. Several months later, he tried to deny that, but thankfully, we have the internet today, and everyone can go back to those days where he said that Israel can actually cut anything off of the civilian population in Gaza. Now they're trying to hide their abhorrent, despicable positions, address the growing and mounting pressure, and also try and apply some pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to reach a deal, because Israel doesn't like that. Also, it does not address the core issue here. The core issue is to end the suffering of the Palestinian people. Western countries, the majority of the Western establishments, if you want to be more accurate, are not holding Israel responsible and liable. To them, starvation is happening in Gaza. People are dying. No perpetrator, no address. We have a perpetrator and we have an address, but you just don't want to say it because you are complicit and you are part of it. So all of this talk is to throw sand in the eyes of the people, to try and tone it down with the pressure, with the mounting pressure. We're all seeing the scenes in Gaza, and we are all outraged by what we're seeing. And therefore, all of the actions should escalate up until tangible results are seen on the ground. Don't try and lie to us by saying airdropped aid and 5 trucks. That none of that works. As long as there is no absolute relief for the population, and until these people are given their basic human rights like every other human being on earth, and not just in immediate relief, in long-term relief and solutions for the Palestinian people, nothing is going to stop. And I hope that clarifies this position. And again, some of them, it's conditional, like Keir Starmer said, we will if you won't reach a ceasefire. Therefore, if Israel does reach a ceasefire, that means we won't. Abdullah is saying, Mahmoud, I wonder why you keep on making predictions that get our hopes high only to be proven wrong. I'm not trying to be making predictions. The only thing that I'm doing is reading what we're given. We are given certain reports, we read them, we analyze them, and we provide them to the reader of the viewer or the viewer, let alone get anyone's hopes high. No, not at all. And you can't be pessimistic or optimistic at the end of the day when you're reading the news or the updates that are coming. It's about taking them, trying to gather as much information as possible and analyze exactly what you're given. Because if you're given a bit of information without any elaboration, how would you exactly know that? And as a matter of fact, I constantly state about the prospect of that not working alongside the prospect of it working, because no war can go on forever and no conflict can last forever, as we have seen in history. And even in the case of Gaza, we have seen 2 ceasefires at the end of the day. And Netanyahu will not be there forever, and Israel will not be there forever. And I hope that clarifies, and thank you for your participation. Wavy, do you see the tariffs backfiring on the US? Will only make the rest of the world stronger? Salam. They already backfired. Donald Trump came up with the tariffs as a way of leverage. Donald Trump is a businessman, and businessmen, they come up high to reach what they want. So let's say he wants to increase something by 10%, he'll tell you 50. And then he'll bring the other party on the table. Oh, no, please, no, this and that. That's if they do that, by the way, because in many cases, other countries gave Donald Trump reciprocal measures. They told him 50%, you take 50%. China, 100, take 100, 50. And then he had to back down. Donald Trump did a lot of U-turns, but he's trying his luck, like any businessman does, let alone a property mogul. Trying his luck and trying to extract what's beneficial for him, by the way, not for the American people. If you're in America, forget that this man is working for America. All these tariffs, all these problems, these are costs that are raising for the American people. These are costs that are rising for American corporations. Everyone's pocket will be hurt because of Donald Trump's positions. But again, you're talking about a narcissistic individual who doesn't care about anyone but Donald Trump. So it has already backfired, and it has the potential to backfire even more. However, Donald Trump does 180s. And as he has done 180s before, he'll do 180s again. And Siskaikas is saying that, Mahmoud, what about the Slovenian arms embargo against Israel? Will that be effective or just another hole in the water? I think there are a couple of organizations that verify exactly what's being banned and what's not being banned. For example, Canada declared over a year ago, almost over a year and a half ago, that they are imposing an embargo on Israel. An arms embargo, total arms embargo. Recently, and I spoke about this in a previous video, there was an organization that monitors these countries and the back doors that they use to continue supporting Israel. So all of that has to be verified. So you can't say I'm having an arms embargo against Israel, for example, when I have a back door, or when I'm giving that to another country that will resell it to Israel. How could that work? That wouldn't work. And thankfully, we have more than one organization monitoring all. So, and that's not, by the way, to cast any doubt on the intentions, because we can't judge intentions, but we can judge actions, whether they are deliberate or not deliberate. That's also a separate story. But absolutely, that definitely needs to be done. This monitoring, and we will see it based on the actual results. 2, 3, 4 months from now, did they actually give them a back door, or was it a separate story? And Marvin, you said any chance Greece will try and follow ICC, ICJ rules to arrest IDF soldiers with war crimes? Are they under too much Zionist control? Well, the people, clearly the people in Greece don't care, nor in Cyprus, by the way. The other day in Greece, an Israeli ship was prevented from going there by the people of Greece. A recent poll in Israel showed that over 60% of the Israeli public fear that they wouldn't be able to travel abroad at some point in the near future. That's the majority of the Israeli people, not to travel abroad whatsoever, as in they're not even talking about countries. Because the moves of the populations across the world, because of all of this genocide, all of these horrendous crimes, are already affecting them, without the countries, by the way. And what does that show you? That shows you the power of the people. So far, it's people-led movement that took these actions and applied pressure on Israel. Organizations like the Hind Rajab Foundation, legal organizations in European countries or in the United States too, grassroots movements, and normal people. So if the countries, if the authorities listened and acted based on what the people want, Israel would have been done a long time ago. So they clearly have ties with them. They have deals with them. They have lots of stuff. But that can't be something that you dictate against the population itself. And I hope that clarifies. Let me go to your next few other questions as well with the time that we have left. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming in. And Marvin, thank you so much for your super, and Palestine as well. And Angela, thank you very much for your super and your participation. Everyone participating in the chat as well. Salam Mahmoud, what would it take for Hezbollah to reopen their front in support of Palestine? I think there's a term. It's called strategic patience. And that's something that is being currently practiced by multiple actors in the region. That practice is misleading some people to think that these actors are either no longer capable, that they're out of the picture, or that they have been defeated. And that is extremely misleading and not substantiated. Hezbollah is one of them. They are practicing something called strategic patience. Are they not capable of opening all up front? They are. Do they not have any weapons left? Ridiculous, preposterous claim. Why? These people have been preparing since 1982. Over 4 decades of preparation, of arming themselves, of developing weapons, of storing weapons. Whatever Israel caught, or whatever Israel declared that it has caught or taken, almost nothing. The decision of Hezbollah will be strictly calculated by Hezbollah themselves. And it wouldn't be wise for them to give anyone a hint. Neither anyone who wants them to attack, nor anyone who doesn't want them to attack. And it would also be unwise of them to say how many people they have or how much weapons they have left. And therefore, they're not doing any of that, by the way. What it would take for them to reopen the front is, again, something that is not very clear at the moment. And that lack of clarity could be deliberate. I'll tell you why. Israel tried and still does try to drag them to a response. They haven't been dragged into a response following the ceasefire agreement that they had with Israel in late 2024. Why? What happened? The decision? All of these answers are, restricted to them, and they don't necessarily provide all of those answers. And the lack of answer in relation to when or how they can reopen that front with Israel gives them a strategic point. It's a powerful position for them. It wouldn't be powerful or wise for them to say anything. The only thing that they do say, and we can hear that as and when from the new Secretary General of Hezbollah, is that don't think that we can't. We are ready, and we are ready now. Again, not elaborating on anything. They are practicing something strategic. They are still very capable. How and when? All of these things would depend on their decisions, and in a way, most likely, that will have an element of surprise against Israel, not in any way that will give Israel any sort of information as to when they are going to do that and how are they going to do it, because that wouldn't be wise for them to do so. It will put them in a weaker position. They were already caught and surprised with very, very intense attacks from Israel, with the pager attack or the assassination of the leading figures, including the Secretary General. And they wouldn't want to be putting themselves in a position where they would give out any sort of information to Israel. Wavy McFly, what are the 3 best books to understand how Israel was created and why there's such a destructive force, Salah? One of my top books that I would recommend of the initial stages of the formation of Israel would be The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Professor Ilan Pappé, who's an Israeli historian. You might have heard about him already. However, there are very, very many other books that relate to the formation of Zionism. Some of them are in Arabic, some of them in English. And if you look online, especially with some of the Israeli historians, actually, like Ilan Pappé, like Ephraim Schleim, for example, you would hear very interesting input. There are also Palestinian authors too, and other international sources. But the interesting thing about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in particular is the fact that it's extremely comprehensive. It's written with the help of other Palestinian authors, and it also gives you a glimpse of other elements of the history of Palestine that you would find interesting. I have a free book if you haven't read it, but that's about a solution. It has a little bit of history too, of the one-state solution in Palestine, which you can find free in a digital form on my website. If you want to download it, you can download it, but through a desktop. If you're holding a tablet or a phone, you can read it too. And yeah, I hope that clarifies. And I'll take the last one from Stephen. How low are the Zionist tanks numbers, etc. now? There is no definite number, but what I can tell you is that the Palestinian resistance, and that is over 6 months ago, said that they no, that's only Al-Qassam brigades, by the way. They said that they targeted over 1,200 Israeli vehicles and machinery. That includes tanks, APCs, vehicles used by the IDF, bulldozers, diggers, cars, anything that they can use. That doesn't mean 1,200 were wholly destroyed. Many of them were wholly destroyed, but others were partially destroyed, and Israel had to go in and ask for, replenishment from the United States, which was problematic, by the way, because not all of the spare parts were available immediately. And that is also part of the explanation of the huge military failure on the ground. So they still, of course, have capacity to conduct certain operations, but even with that capacity, they're proving to be extremely ineffective. The attacks that the Palestinian resistance had against the Israeli machinery, especially the APCs, but also the Merkavas too, proved to be lethal for Israel for various reasons. Number one, they thought that some of them were totally protected against the resistance attacks. They turned out to be very, very vulnerable, such as the Namera or the Namer APC, very, very modern, just released literally 2 years ago. Highly sophisticated technology inside. Palestinian resistance penetrated it, destroyed many of it. And the fact that the destruction of many Israeli APCs led them to use literally ancient technology, like the M113s from the 60s. Much less protection, way more vulnerable. Any attack would be far more lethal and destructive against Israel. And these attacks proved to be extremely effective in making Israel fail with the success of the Palestinian resistance, and also delaying any further progress that Israel can do as a military inside of Gaza. Because really and truly, the ideal situation for them would have been the traditional strategic Israeli approach in relation to warfare, lightning war, as they call it, a very, very quick war, where they can go with the Air Force, strike as much as possible, target what they need, reach their objective, end the operation, go back. The internal situation in Israel does not get affected. The Israeli civilians don't get affected. The Israeli economy is fine. They just hit behind enemy lines very quickly, very swiftly, and they go back. But of course, the other side knows that strategy of Israel. That's why they protected themselves strategically through the tunnel network under Gaza. And that's not just in Gaza, but that's also in Lebanon and in other countries too, even if we want to talk about Iran as well, and in much, much larger scales, like colossal scales too. And that has been evident because if they could have finalized this whole campaign of theirs militarily, they would have a long time ago, but they did not. As a matter of fact, the only thing that we're seeing lately is Israeli withdrawal. You can call it retreat if you want. But Israel recently, that's in the past 2 weeks, withdrew 2 divisions that were operating for the whole period inside of the Gaza Strip, where they were in and out from Division 98. And then they withdrew the whole division several days back from other parts of Gaza. The initial withdrawal was from Khan Yunis, and the recent withdrawal was from Shuja'iyya and Jabalia, I think, more towards the northern part of the Gaza Strip. What does that show you? That they failed. Why? Because they left without accomplishing the mission, the first mission that they set for themselves, which is demolish the Hamas. They haven't demolished them. And we know that for sure because they themselves, the Israeli side, already released and published the attacks of the Palestinian resistance against them from the same areas that they withdrew from days after. In effect, proving the huge level of effectiveness of the armed resistance against Israel, which is something that they really, really want to hide and really, really don't want to admit. Likewise with all of their opponents, and that's why they're asking the Palestinian resistance to disarm, and it never will so long as Israel is there. And we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Thank you so much for everyone who participated in the chat and also sent supers. I'll hopefully have multiple segments for you, perhaps during the day. And tomorrow might have either a main video in the evening or a live stream too. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend, depending on where you are. Stay blessed, take care, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.